This week on Q&A, a sneak preview and behind-the-scenes look at C-SPAN's new documentary, The Supreme Court, Home to America's Highest Court. Our guest is the executive producer of the program, Mark Farkas. We begin with video from a chance meeting between Mark Farkas and a tourist on the steps of the Supreme Court during filming of the documentary.
All right, what are you guys filming for? Which TV show?
What we're doing is we're doing a documentary for C-SPAN on the Supreme Court. We've done interviews with 9 of the justices.
Cool.
It airs October 4th, the Sunday night before the Supreme Court comes into session. And we've been in the building for about 2 months, doing all the interviews and getting into the chamber and the justices' private dining room, some of their chambers. So
good. Well, you're going to be on CNN?
C-SPAN.
C-SPAN, okay, sorry.
October 4th. It's a common mistake. Don't worry about it.
I'm not. I'm actually on you in this building.
Have you really?
Yeah. Long time ago.
We talked to a number of attorneys who have argued in front of the court to sort of get both perspectives.
There is no both. Whatever they say.
The only one who seems to take the time to listen to the attorneys is Justice Thomas. And he actually talked about why he chooses to listen instead of. But we talked to a couple of attorneys, one who had won 21 out of 22 cases in front of the court.
That's good.
She.
Okay.
Yeah, she. And she likes the rapid fire. She said, bring it on. It's a conversation.
Cool. Okay, I'll remember.
So October 4th at 9 o'clock.
I will watch that.
Okay.
And we even get C-SPAN way where we are.
There you go. Got it right. Very good.
Okay,
Thanks.
you.
Okay.
Did you film it? Oh, okay.
Yes,
am I going to get on TV?
Who's your friend?
Just a tourist to the court who was an attorney, actually.
How many times have you had somebody ask you if you were going to do this for CNN and you have to explain it to them?
Never.
So, for the next 56 minutes, we're going to talk about your documentary on the Supreme Court. Let's start with, what is it? I know you said a little bit there, but give us more. Well,
it's a whole week's worth of presentation. Starts Sunday night, October 4th, with an original production called The Supreme Court, Home to America's Highest Court, which is a 90-minute documentary that really takes you inside the building to tell its history, but also the function. And the function comes from all 11 living, current, and retired Supreme Court justices. So it's really an insider's look at not only what the building stands for, but what happens inside there. And this is the first time any television project has ever had all 11 or all living justices participate in one program.
So why, I know this is your third big documentary. You had the Capitol, the White House, and now this. Why do you think the court was willing to talk?
We went over there and pitched it to them in terms of that we had done a documentary on the White House, had done one on the Capitol, which, part of it was this building is seen less often than those two buildings. So here's an opportunity for you to let the country inside the building. Again, about 500,000 people visit the Supreme Court each year. And so that was part of it, to open up the building to people who can't get a chance to come to Washington to see it. And for those who do get a chance to see it, can you take us inside places where the process unfolds so we can take people even beyond what they'd see on a public tour? That was the pitch. We took it to Chief Justice Roberts, heard back pretty quickly from him that we could do it, and then a negotiation began of where inside the building we could get. And these things are organic. We originally started out with, we did not know how many of the justices would participate, sent letters to all of them, and eventually all of them sat down with us.
So what were the rules?
Well, the only rule that we actually imposed on ourselves was that we did not want to talk about television coverage of the court. We took that as a separate subject. That's something that we as a company want. We've been asking for it for years, but it wasn't the purpose of this. The purpose was really to get inside there and understand the process once we heard from the justices and take a look at the building. So really the only ground rules for the interviews themselves were, let's talk about the process. Let's talk about how you do your job. We did not want to talk about cases because it wasn't about that. It wasn't about the ideology of each justice. It was really about how they approached their job and, you know, what goes on in there inside the court that leads to collegiality. You know, what's the inside story of the court and not the politics and the judicial philosophy behind each one of the justices.
We ask you to put together some clips that we'll use in this hour, and none of this will be seen in the documentary. Is that correct?
For the most part. There are a couple that the longer versions will play during this program and shorter versions are in the documentary, but almost all of them will be part of we interviewed each justice and pulled excerpts for the documentary, and then later on in the week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, the entire interviews will be played. So the interviews were for two purposes.
Let's start with Chief Justice Roberts, and Susan Swain had the question.
Do you remember your first oral argument?
Oh, sure, yes, absolutely. A case called United States against Halper. I was very nervous, but I was very nervous when I did my last oral argument as well. I think if you're a lawyer appearing before the Supreme Court and you're not very nervous, you don't really understand what's going on.
This is a question for all the members of the bar out there, I guess, and for all those attorneys who eventually find themselves lucky enough to have a case before the court. What is it that you wish you had known about the process when you were on that side that you now know?
Everybody tells a lawyer in that position, you have to answer the questions. Don't try to avoid the questions or distinguish your case in any way. I hope I did that when I was a lawyer, but the importance of that is very accentuated. I appreciate it so much more now that I'm on the other side of the bench. You have to appreciate that the justices are engaged in the process of trying to help themselves decide the case correctly. So they're going to ask hard questions. They're going to ask questions that don't put your case in the best possible light, and you need to appreciate that. It's good to establish, and I think I didn't appreciate this as much as I should have, some dispassion. Yes, you want to have a certain level of zeal and commitment to your client's cause. The justices know that. But when they ask you a question about a difficult case, it's better to sometimes say, you know, I appreciate that that case doesn't support my side. I appreciate that that causes us some difficulty. Here's why I think you shouldn't rely so heavily on that case, as opposed to as soon as they ask us, you know, no, that case doesn't hurt us at all, and here's why. They like you to be part of the process that is helping them come to the right result. They understand you've got a client to represent, and they expect you to do that. But if you can convince them that you're on their side in helping them reach the right decision, as opposed to something they have to push against to get you to give an answer, I think that's very helpful, not only to the court, but also to your client.
Chief Justice Roberts is 54, been on the court for 4 years, a Harvard grad. How important was he to your access?
I don't think we'd have gotten any of it done without Chief Justice Roberts. He was the one we approached first to even get the project off the ground, and then dealt with not only the Public Information Office over there, but the counsel to the Chief Justice. So he was very important to it. He was one of the earliest justices in the process who said, yes, I'll sit down for an interview. I don't know how much, you know, that plays into how many of the other ones sat down with us, but it couldn't have hurt. So he was very important.
Is it safe to assume that if he said no, we wouldn't have been able to do this?
I think it is. I mean, what we did find out in talking with all of them is the chief has, you know, there's some roles that the chief has that the other justices just don't care about. You know, they've each got their own vote. There's certain things the chief can do, and there's certain things the chief cannot do. A project like this would never gotten off the ground if it weren't for him, though.
Where was this interview done?
We did most of the interviews they've got two really nice conference rooms that are right around the Supreme Court chamber itself. So most of them were done in the conference rooms. Some of them were done, we did on-camera tours in 3 of the justices' chambers, but most in the conference rooms.
Well, as someone who participated with you in this, although the public wouldn't realize how little we talk about what you actually put in the documentary, I was involved in 5 of the interviews, and Susan Swain was involved in 6, because you got a total of 11. Let's look at one of those that was done in the office, and this is the Justice John Paul Stevens, and actually to check his background. He's 89 years old, and he's been there for 34 years. And the indication is he's only hired one clerk for next year. That might mean what?
Well, traditionally they have 4 clerks in each one of the chambers, and the thinking is if he's only hired 1 clerk for next term, that's normally the amount of clerks that a retired justice has. So there's some speculation, since he hadn't hired all 4, that he might not be coming back, not this coming term, but the following one.
He's a Northwestern law grad. Let's watch. Over here on your wall is a number 22 baseball jersey. What's that from?
Well, that was a gift from my law clerks a few years ago, because they know I'm a Cub fan and kind of encourage my continued interest in the Cubs.
When did you throw out the first ball?
That was about 3 years ago, I guess. Do we have a picture of that here? No, I don't, do I? But that was, I think, 3 years ago.
What was that like?
That was the highlight of my career. I had all my grandchildren, or not all of them, but most of them there, and I can tell you I was a hero that day. That was much more important than my job.
I want to know if you made it from the mound to the catcher.
Oh, absolutely. I threw it high and wide. Yeah. I had to practice, though, I tell you the truth.
More pictures over here on your wall are from what?
Well, the first one is a picture that was at Gerald Ford's funeral that his family gave me, that I happened to be in just as the casket was passing by. And then there's a couple of letters that he wrote to me that I'm very proud of. And then this is the picture here that was taken at the swearing in of the Vice President in January.
You know, I don't remember what we talked about before that, but obviously this was personal stuff. And why did we want the personal stuff?
Well, I think you want to understand, not only want to understand them as people, but here's a chance to take visitors, I mean not visitors, but viewers of the film and our Supreme Court week back inside into their chambers, where you really do get a chance to understand who they are as people, where they like to work, how they like to work. And so in each one of the offices, again, we went in 3 of them, you saw, you know, it's a window into what they're like as human beings. Actually, with Justice Stevens, after we had done the on-camera tour, we were shooting a little bit of B-roll, as we call it, of the office, and I got a chance to talk with him, not about the law, but about tennis. I used to play tennis in college, and he's a huge tennis fan, still plays a couple times a week. So it's a chance, again, to understand what they're like as people. And that's one of the things I came away with from the whole project is it's a legal institution that not a lot of people understand. I think if you watch our programs, you'll understand more about how the process unfolds there, but also it's human institution.
How much time did Justice Stevens give us? I actually can't remember. And how much time did Chief Justice Roberts?
Chief Justice Roberts, we sat down with him for 55 minutes, and Justice Stevens, the tour of his office was about 40 minutes. We go into each asking for more time. They say you can have this amount of time, and normally it came out somewhere in between.
Here's Justice Thomas. He's now 61 years old. He's a Yale Law School graduate. He's been on the court for 18 years.
When you go out here or outside of this place, are you frequently recognized?
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Are you?
Oh, yes, the anonymity's gone. That is probably, or was probably, one of the more difficult things to accept. The sort of loss of anonymity, the ability to walk down the mall unnoticed or to go to Home Depot unnoticed.
Because of the confirmation hearings?
No, those have been 18 years ago.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
But no, it's still, I mean, I'm the only black guy up here, so, it's easier to recognize. I think when Justice O'Connor was the only woman, it was easier to pick one person out who's different. Maybe that's part of it. And then, I think that I've enjoyed such positive press, and notoriety. So I think that may be a part of it. I have no idea.
When people come up to you, what are the interactions like?
Oh, it's always very pleasant. They're very nice people. They're nice people, good people all over this country. One of the things that happens up here is we tend to be very heavily Northeastern in our mentality. We're 8 of the 9 of us are from Ivy League schools. This court doesn't represent all regions of the country. There's a tendency, there's an easiness to sort of to be almost cliquish in that way with law clerks and et cetera. I like the idea of getting out, to be around the citizens, the other citizens in the country, the people who make it all work, the people who put out our fires, the people who build our homes, the people who fight our wars. I like being around them. I also like the idea that their kids can come up here and clerk, that they can be a part of all this.
You know, I thought it was interesting when you talked about the Northeast schools. There are 4 from Harvard, 3 from Yale, 1 from Columbia, and 1 from Northwestern. There's a lot. I mean, when you watch a documentary or we watch even these interviews, people don't see what's going on around this. Who's in the room with you and us when we're doing them?
Well, for every single shoot we had at the court, there was at least 3 to 4 people from the public information staff of the court who were with us. When the justices walked in, and that's actually Kathy Arberg, who's the public information officer at the court, who really is the one who helped us out tremendously in getting all 11 justices to talk with us. So she was there for each one of the interviews and was integral in the process of getting us to the chief in the first place and to the justices afterwards. And she and her staff were with us for all the interviews. And you know, it's interesting because the Capitol and the White House are completely different in terms of their press staff. These are public information officers, and so their role is a little bit different. They're not out there to, you know, quote unquote, get their guys or ladies in front of the camera. Right there, that's the public information office on the day of opinion release. And in the foreground is Kathy and her team, who are just about, the reporters are listening and they've just heard an announcement from the bench and they're about to hand out the information to the press. And so actually, I think people in the press there sort of appreciate that they don't get spun by the public information office there. It's, you know, the justices speak through their opinions, and that's, you know, that's the way it's set up over there. So it's completely different than the Capitol or the White House.
Give us a better idea of the importance of Kathy Arberg. I mean, we all know that if Kathy's in a very critical role over there, and there aren't a lot of PR people in the court. Start with that. How many people would you put in the public relations business in the court?
Well, she's got a staff of about 5 or 6. And she's got a deputy, she's got someone else who sits right outside her office. So, you know, she's incredibly important. You know, she's another one of these people that, you know, first of all, if she didn't want to do it, it may never have gotten to the chief in the first place. So that step 1 was through her. And then really all along the process, if we hadn't held up our end of the bargain, you know, in terms of what we wanted to talk about with these folks, and the way we went about our business, it would have been very easy for them to say, okay, this is not what we expected, and I'm not sure if we would have gotten all the interviews. But, you know, to her credit and to ours, we both, we had, you know, had an idea going in. Like I said, it's a little bit organic. You don't know how many are going to participate, but she was integral in carrying it off for us.
Compare what you found at the Capitol. And what year did you do that documentary?
Went on the air in 2006.
And how much did you spend on that one?
It was like I got a graduate degree. I think we spent about 2 years. I mean, the Capitol compared to the Supreme Court, it's been there since 1800. Supreme Court's only been there since 1935.
That building. The
building itself. And the Capitol is much bigger than the Supreme Court, so it took a little bit longer. It's also our first foray into doing documentaries, really.
And each member of Congress has a PR person.
Each member of Congress has a PR person, and they're more than, you know, they'll do anything they can, some of them, to get on camera.
So switch down to the White House. What year did you do that?
We did that. That came out in 2008, just last winter, and it took us about a year and a half to put that together.
And you explained earlier how many people were in the room during the interviews at the court. How many people would be around an interview that was done inside the White House?
Oh, at the White House. Well, at the court, I was surprised that the public information officers were there with us and electricians, but that was about it. Pretty small group compared to the White House, where when you had an interview with the president or the first lady, I mean, you've got almost a cavalcade of people. You've got, you know, you name it, press secretaries and deputy press secretaries, and then the electrician secret service, you know. So you probably have 15 in a room for an interview with the president. And even with the Chief Justice, she'd go to their office, get the justice, the chief, or the other justices, and bring them down. Didn't have handlers with them.
Let's go back, and there's no rhyme or reason to any of these clips. We're using clips that haven't been used in the documentary, and often personal stuff, just so you can get some sense of what these folks are like. And the next one is Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Who is this lady right here?
That's my mother. Perhaps the most intelligent person I ever knew, but sadly she died when I was 17.
I read that she died the day before you graduated from high school.
Right.
What impact did that have on you in those days?
It was one of the most trying times in my life, but I knew that she wanted me to study hard and get good grades and succeed in life, so that's what I did.
Behind you are some more pictures. I want to ask you about this one over here, because this has actually, I think, been published before.
Yes. That is a photograph of Justice Scalia and me. We are taking an elephant ride at the Ramba Palace. It was the palace of the last Maharaja of Rajasthan. It was a very elegant elephant, as you can see, but a rather bumpy ride.
It's often, why don't we walk around your desk here, and we'll go in back to the robe is, and she can show us that, but it's often reported that you and Justice Scalia are good friends.
Yes,
and
that's
people
true.
don't understand how you could be so different in your thinking and still be friends. Can you tell us how that happens?
I have known Justice Scalia since the days that he was a law professor, and I was so taken by his wit and his wonderful sense of humor. I heard a lecture that he gave. I disagreed with most of what he said, but I loved the way he said it. Justice Scalia is a very good writer. He cares about how you say it, and he's a very amusing fellow. When he sat next to me, both on the D.C. Circuit bench and now not this configuration, but when Justice O'Connor was with us, I was sitting next to Justice Scalia. He could say something that was so outrageous or so funny that I had to pinch myself so I wouldn't laugh out loud in the courtroom.
Thinking also, listening to her answer, that all of the 9 justices sitting on the court today have been on the U.S. Court of Appeals somewhere. Justice Ginsburg, the only justice with an office on the second floor?
I think during the time that we were taping over there, she was the only one on the second floor. There's a big renovation project going on at the court. The building hadn't been updated since it opened up in 1935, so this has been going on for a couple of years. And what we found are justices are sort of displaced as they're doing work on her permanent chambers. She was moved upstairs. So you'll find out actually in the long form interview that airs Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights that you know, 2 of her normally the law clerks are in their chambers with them. They've got 3 parts of their office, and hers are separated from her now because of the construction going on. When we were doing the actual interviewing, what were you doing? I didn't know where you were, so what were you doing? I was trying to stay out of the way. For the interviews themselves, I was in the room listening, giving you and Susan time cues. For the walking tours, they were, you know, again, you're sort of a little bit loosey-goosey. You know sort of the route you're going to take, but you don't know how long it's going to take to get from one place to the other, what they really want to talk about. So I was trying to stay out of the way and trying to listen so I can come back here, take notes, and really start thinking about how we're going to use it in the documentary and then the full version itself. How many cameras were in the room, and what kind of camera? We shot everything in high definition, so For the walking tours, we would have one camera in the room most of the time, and as you all went from one room to the next, we'd have a camera waiting in that room, and then we'd sort of leapfrog as we go from one room to the next. And then normally we'd end up in one place, and we'd bring both cameras in there as they sat down in one location for the rest of the time.
She talked about Justice Scalia and his sense of humor. See how much sense of humor you can see in this next clip with Justice Scalia.
You really can't judge judges unless you know the materials that they're working with. You can't say, oh, this is a good decision and this was a good court simply because you like the result. It seems to you that the person who deserved to win won. That's not the business judges are in. We don't sit here to make the law, to decide who ought to win. We decide who wins under the law that the people have adopted. And very often, if you're a good judge, you don't really like the result you're reaching. You would rather that the other side had won. It seems to you a foolish law. But in this job, it's garbage in, garbage out. If it's a foolish law, you are bound by oath to produce a foolish result, because it's not your job to decide what is foolish and what isn't. It's the job of the people across the street. So don't judge judges unless you really take the trouble to read the opinion and see what provisions of law were at issue and what they were trying to reconcile and whether they did an honest job of reconciling them and of interpreting the words of the law in a fair fashion. That's what counts. Unless that's what you want your judges to do, you have a judiciary that's not worth much. You have a judiciary that is just making the law instead of being faithful to what the people have decided. So that's my main advice. Be slow to judge judges unless you know what they're working with.
Now, he wasn't smiling very much in that interview. What was your reaction to the overall interview?
Well, I was smiling a lot as we watched the interview unfold and then picking pieces out of it to put into the documentary. You have to be very careful when you're putting something in a documentary not to take it out of context. You could easily have used the part about a foolish law or a stupid law, and it would have been taken out of context. But no, he's, you know, they all have personalities that were interesting, but his is, and you know, I feel comfortable in saying this because we've interviewed a number of journalists and other attorneys who've said the same thing. Out of the 9 who are there now, he's the one who's really, I mean, his personality comes through. And even though that may not have been funny, I could see where he's got a really good sort of biting sense of humor.
And how much time did you, and Susan did that interview, how much time did you have with him?
We got 30 minutes with him, and it was a really, really good interview.
Is somebody sitting there with a clock?
There are, you know, there's those folks in the room, the public information officers and staff who are in there. I'm keeping track of time. As I'm keeping track of time and giving you or Susan cues, trying to, you know, it's an interesting process because they'd like to keep it to the 30. We'd like to go a little bit longer, so it's a little song and dance going on. But they're keeping track of time, and I'm keeping track of time, and I'm trying to get us a little bit more time.
Did anything unusual happen, and you were there for all 11 justices? 2 are retired now. Anything unusual happen?
Well, you know, actually, one of the most unusual things that happened, we'd load in and load out every day at the loading dock. And you'd see John Paul Stevens driving in, 89 years old, driving himself into work, parking his own car, getting in the elevator. You'd see Chief Justice Roberts getting dropped off. And the day that we were going to do the interview with Justice Thomas, his wife dropped him off in the garage, and we were literally there near a dumpster waiting to get escorted into the building. And I thought he was going to go into the entrance that the justices normally go in. And he came right over to us and said, "Can I help you? And is somebody coming down to get you?" And we ended up having about a 15-minute conversation there at the loading dock with Justice Thomas about, you know, obviously nothing about the law, but we talked with him about his RV, how he travels around the country. So it was sort of an unexpected conversation we had with him. One of the other sort of funny things that happened was we did an interview, the interview with Justice Kennedy, and it was scheduled for 30 minutes, and they came in the room, they said he's got a very tight schedule and he's got to keep the 30 minutes, and Justice Kennedy heard this and he said, you know, I'm not really in a hurry. I've got a lifetime appointment, and I'm not going to say anything that's going to get me fired. They don't need to be worried about anything. Go ahead and take a little bit extra time with us. So, you know, it was a very, between us and the court, a very collegial, understanding, but they wanted to keep it to certain lengths of time. We always wanted to push it a little bit. That's sort of I think that's the nature of any type of television interview. You're the company, and then you've got the folks who you're interviewing. So that's normal, but it was sort of a funny moment where he said, take some more time if you need it.
I did mention earlier that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is now 76, and she's been on the court for 16 years. Antonin Scalia is 73, has served for 23 years. He's Harvard Law School. The next up is the newest justice. And I know you're trying to put this documentary together, get it ready for October the 4th. When did you get confirmation that Justice Sotomayor was going to talk to you?
Well, we did the interview September 16th, and we got confirmation on it probably about a week before. We had done interviews at that point with the other 9, or the other 8 sitting and 2 retired. And, our hope was that, one, because everyone else had done it, that she would. And she seemed, from her past on the Court of Appeals, had television cameras in the courtroom. We were hoping that she'd be friendly towards TV and say yes. And so we found out about a week before that, and then we sat down for the first television interview, and still the only television interview that she's done since joining the bench.
So the documentary is on October the 4th. How much time? What was the date? Do you remember what date you actually did the interview?
September 16th is when we did the interview.
Here's Susan Swain's question.
Are you able to process all of this?
I haven't connected physically with my mind and body yet. I'm still somewhere out here looking down and saying, oh wow, is this really happening to me? And that's what that felt like. One question that you probably wouldn't know to ask was, what was the most symbolically meaningful moment for me during my public investiture? And it was sitting in Justice Marshall's chair and taking the oath with my hand on Justice Harlan's Bible. It was like history coursing through me. And it's a sort of interesting admission to make. I don't think any person can be assured that they're up to the task. I don't know yet. And so those moments are at one point incredibly meaningful, and in a different way, incredibly frightening. It's hard to convey the coursing of emotions that goes through one at a moment like that.
Any surprises here?
Well, one, I was surprised that we got the interview. I mean, actually, for a number of them, I was surprised. Some of them are pretty active out there in the public during the summer and during other times of the year, speaking to different conferences, and we've taped a number of them. But other ones, I didn't think we'd get some of these interviews that we did. So that was one of the most surprising. I mean, we were hoping, but I was sort of, each time I was a little bit surprised we get some of these folks on camera.
Was there ever an objection? I just don't remember because I was only there for 5 of them. Was there any objection ever to any question we asked?
No, never one. Never one. Not a single time.
I'll tell you, now that you've asked me, my biggest surprise was the following answer that, and I'll explain why in a minute, that Justice Alito gave in his interview. Let's watch. Another quote that I saw of yours that supposedly ended up in your Princeton yearbook, and you can explain this one, that you hoped, quote, to eventually warm a seat on the Supreme Court, unquote.
I did write that, but it was really a joke. It was like saying my ambition is to be the quarterback in the Super Bowl, or the winning pitcher in the World Series. It was a dream that I never thought I would come close to realizing.
When did you first know that you had a good chance of being on the court?
Well, I knew I was a possibility. I wouldn't even term it a good chance. When I was first called down for an interview with the White House, and that was in 2001. So after that point, I knew that, I'm sure they were interviewing many other people, but at least I was among that group.
How long was it from the first interview until it was made public
It was a long time because they interviewed me in 2001 in anticipation of the possibility of a resignation, which did not take place. So then I was not interviewed again until 2005.
Is that hard on you, knowing that they are interested?
It's, yes, in a way. In a way it is. Because I told myself that it was very unlikely that it would happen, and I loved my job on the Court of Appeals, and so I should continue to do my best there, enjoy that, with the expectation that that's where I would serve out my career, and if something else developed, that would be, that would be great. But I didn't want to put myself in the position of thinking that it would happen, and feeling disappointed if it didn't.
As I was saying, the surprise to me was that you could be interviewed in 2001 and not take the job until 2006. It would just drive me crazy if I thought they were interested in me, and that every decision I wrote from that point forward they might be looking at rather closely. It's happened before, of course, but that's the first time I'd ever heard that he had to wait from 2001, where he's actually appointed in 2005. Chief Justice Roberts took the job in September of 2005, and Justice Alito actually took the bench on January 31st, 2006. He, by the way, is 59, and he went to Yale Law School and has served 3.5 years. You were going to say something? Oh, well, just to respond to were there any surprises? I didn't know you were talking about the content, but one of the things that came out of the interviews that, I think to me, who was not a follower of the court before I got into this, and for a lot of people who watch it, there's a lot of surprises. I found out, John Roberts, 54 years old, writes out his opinions in longhand. Justice Stevens, 89, types them on a computer. So, the whole process over there, because they're not on television, I think there's a sort of mysterious nature to the court. And so almost every interview there was something illuminating that I did not know, and I think there's a lot of things that people are going to find out that go on behind the scenes there. Just how they interact with each other is very interesting. There's a personal side to it, but once they're started to write those opinions, it's, there's messengers that still take the opinions, the draft of the opinions from one office to the next. They could do it all through email, but I guess it's hard to do it through email if you're writing out your opinion in longhand. What part of the building would they not let you see? Well, there's a place in the court they call the highest court in the land, which is the basketball court. And we wanted to tape up there, and it was under construction, that part of this construction project, so we could not tape up there. And then we got footage of the justices' conference room from them, but we weren't allowed to go into the justices' conference room. And it's one of those things where I appealed it, and you're at the court of last appeals at the Supreme Court, and they say no and yes. You say, why so sensitive? You know what? It was one of those things that they didn't write out an opinion for that one, so I'm not sure why. For all their legal opinions, they write out their reasons why. There had just been a change of policy, and again, we got the footage that we needed, but we're not able to get in that. That was the only place we really wanted to get into that we were not allowed to get into. Susan Swain asked the following question of Justice Kennedy.
In your 21 years here, have there ever been, for the institution, any dark days?
Any dark days?
Yes.
Oh, I guess every day when you're not in the majority, you think it's a dark day. Judges were once lawyers, and we think of arguing a case, and I've not met too many lawyers that don't think they're on the right side. And if you can't convince your colleagues, then you think it's a dark day. But the nature of the profession is that you go on to the next case, and you respect your colleagues. One of the things you learn when you're a judge is that you're not the only person in the room that is objective, disinterested, detached, knowledgeable, unbiased. Your other colleagues feel the same way, and you have to recognize that.
Justice Kennedy, 73, Harvard Law graduate, served there so far for 21.5 years. And you interviewed him for how long? How long were you in that room? Well, that's the one that was scheduled for 30 minutes and went just about 40 minutes or so. We took about 10 extra minutes with him. And when you were, as the producer, and you eventually had to take all the video, and how many hours of video did you have when it was finished?
Well, you take the 11 justices, and out of that, you know, about a half an hour to an hour with each, and then you tally that up, and then the footage from the rest of the court, probably another 50 to 60 hours or so, 70 hours ballpark in terms of raw footage and interviews that we did. And that's not even taking into account the journalists, attorneys, historians, and curators who we interviewed, so probably a little bit more than that.
What part of the building did you find the most interesting that you didn't expect to?
I gotta tell you that the justice's dining room, now it's not any spectacular looking room. I mean, it's nicely adorned, but it's what happens in there that sort of, that was one of the surprises to me, that they sit down after oral argument. Sometimes they hear 2 cases in a day, and they go have lunch together, 8 or 9 of them, whoever can show up, and they've got one rule, and that rule is they do not talk about the cases. They talk about the theater, they talk about football games, they talk about whatever their personal interests are. And I think about times where I've gone out on road trips with colleagues and we've spent all day on a shoot and we go to dinner. A lot of what we talk about is what we've done that day. So I found it really interesting that there's this impetus there to get along, because you can really disagree with each other on your judicial philosophy and your opinions, but if you can break bread, as Clarence Thomas says, if you can break bread with someone, look them in the eye, it's hard to be angry at them. So it's a way for them to move on from one case to the next. So that, you know, that room and what happens in there was really, you know, it's illuminating that they do that.
I want to show a clip in a moment from Justice Breyer. He allowed us in his office. I did the interview, so I remember it, but I also, it was both ends of the spectrum. There's a segment in there, and I'll go back to that as an instructive segment on how this all comes together, where he shows us where the briefs are and the people that submit on a monthly basis the
cert petitions. He really walks us through the entire process.
Yeah, I know. That whole segment is about 17 minutes.
Of those 80,000 cases, 8,000 ask us each year to hear the case. That means about 150 a week. 150 what? 150 requests to hear the case. Well, here they are for this week, right here.
For this week?
Yeah, for this week. This week. So what we do is read through these, and we all read all of them. I'm going to qualify this in a minute. But we all look at all of them, and then we vote. We meet at conference and we vote. And if there are 4 of the 9 of us who want to hear any of these cases, we'll hear it.
Very, very interesting. But there's also some personal stuff. Yeah. This may look ridiculous, but we talked about this kind of thing. Here's Justice Breyer. On a lighter note, I see some bobblehead dolls.
Yeah, I think somebody's making them, so they send them to us.
I don't see one of Justice Breyer up there.
No, I have. I guess for better or for worse, not there.
What up on the bookcases in this office are a lot of photographs.
These are my law clerks. We had a law clerk reunion. I was a judge for 13 years in Boston, the Court of Appeals there, and I've been 15 years here. We had a reunion of my clerks. I've had 111 law clerks, and 87 of them came to the reunion a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely wonderful. It's like having this marvelous family. And they're married and they have children, so I feel like a grandparent of 1,000 children. But it's really nice.
What's your favorite place in this building?
I like this office, to tell you the truth. I've become a homebody. I mean, there we are. I mean, what I do most of the day, I say the job, is reading and writing. I told my son this. I use this joke 100 times, but it's true. I mean, I say the job, I say if you do your homework really well, and then you'll get a job, you can do homework the rest of your life. But I'm reading and I'm writing. And this is a very, very pleasant room to work in. And I like it. And I occasionally go out to the, every 2 weeks I'm hearing oral argument. Sitting in the courtroom is always an impressive experience, and I very much like that too. But no, I can't say I really like the exercise room the most. It's the hardest work. And there is a Nordic track down there. But this is comfortable. I like it in the winter, and I like it in the summer. There's a very nice view. It's a very great privilege to be here.
I wish we could to show it, but it can't. And I just remembered that when we got to the office, his brother was there, who is a district court judge, I think, out in San Francisco. I hope that's right. And they don't look at all alike.
No, he was a little bit shorter. Yeah, it didn't look alike.
When you finally got all this material together and got to the edit room, how much time did you have to spend there?
That is, not that any part of the process is easier than the other, but to me, that is the most challenging part of the process, is to take all of this, because again, it's organic. You go in with a certain idea of what you're going to do, and then you get all 11 justices, and it changes things. So we spent a couple months in the edit suite, arranging, rearranging, showing copies of it to my boss, changing things again, adding music in. You've got to go through a process of really fine-tuning everything. And so we were done for the most part with the documentary, for the bulk of it, 90% of it, by beginning of August. And then we've spent these last month and a half or so. We got more. Well, number one, we got interviews in that time period with Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, and Justice Sotomayor. So that you've got it done, but you don't. So it changed it once again, and we had to rearrange things. So that's the most intense part of the process.
How often did you know, standing in the room during these interviews, that you had the clip that you needed for the documentary as it happened?
Well, there's some times where you just know it. It could be some place that they're talking about in the building, or it could be a zinger of a quote, and you say, that's it, and you make a little note and you make sure that you look at it and it's like, when you get in the edit suite, did I remember it the way I remembered it then? And so there are definitely some of them that you know that are going to go in there, but there's others, again, I've overused the word organic, but it does change as you're going through the process.
We've done this 3 times because of the documentaries you've been involved in, the Capitol, the White House, and this one. Give the audience an update on you. How many years have you been at C-SPAN?
I've been here since I was 9, I think. 25 years, started in 1984.
Came from?
Came from the College of William & Mary. My first job out of college was at a local television station in Alexandria, covered our city council and baseball games and things like that. And then I started here part-time and figured I was going to quit in 6 months and go get a real job. And one thing led to another, and we're doing these type of documentaries now, and so it's a great challenge. But I do want to say that it's not just me. When you're doing projects like this, you've got folks from the shooters, Bob Riley, the director of photography, Bob Young, who did a lot of the shooting for this as well. That's the first part of it. My staff, you've got Rick Stoddard, who is not only an associate producer, but he's an editor now. I mean, he has trained himself on the Avid. So the bulk of the editing was done by Rick and a woman named Anna Calder, who works here. And so it's not just me. It's a team that works on this, and that expands above me to my bosses as well.
Compare this experience to the other 2. Which is the hardest?
Well, this one has been the most intense because we wanted to get it out before the court came back into session. This one was, I think, probably the most challenging in terms of deadlines that we had to meet. And then, the other challenge of it is you've got 11 justices and you want to get them all in there. With the White House and the Capitol, there weren't as many characters to weave into the productions. And we've learned as we've gone along that the shorter the documentaries themselves are, the better. So there's a lot more cutting involved in this one and a lot more people to cut.
By the way, Stephen Breyer is 71. He's a Harvard Law School grad, one of 4 on the court, and has served for 15 years. The next one up is the only justice that we interviewed, and Susan Swain did the interview, when she was out of active court participation, Justice Sandra O'Connor. And this has made the most news out of all this so far, the whole business about the robes. Let's watch Justice O'Connor.
I remember that when I first sat on the court, I had a plain black robe that I had used in Arizona in the courtroom. And I brought that robe with me. It was very simple. And I did not have a judicial collar in those days in Arizona. I just put it on over whatever I was wearing. And I was given a note that had been written by someone sitting in the audience one day in the courtroom. And it said, "Dear Justice O'Connor, I've been in the audience watching the court today, and I noticed that you did not have a judicial collar. Now, all your colleagues were wearing white shirt collars, and they showed under the robe. And you just looked like a washed out justice to me. What's happening here? And so I took that note to heart, and I thought, well, maybe I should try to find some kind of a white judicial collar of some kind that I could wear, because I didn't always have a white shirt under the robe. And it was hard to find. Nobody in those days made judicial white collars for women. I discovered that the only places you could get them would be in England or France. I did manage to get a collar or two from France, and there was a woman who had been the first female judge in the state of Delaware. She was older at that time, and I had met her, and she gave me her judicial collar, which was kind of a lace thing that she had acquired somewhere down the line, and that was pretty elegant, so I used that as well. But finding an appropriate judicial collar for a woman turned out to be quite a task.
Were you surprised at how much attention this got?
I was. On the other hand, I wasn't. We released some of these clips to the press right around the time that Judge Sotomayor was becoming a justice, when she heard the special case in September. And so, you know, a lot of the reporters picked up on Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg because of obviously the connection with being female justices, and it was sort of a lighter side of the court in terms of some of the stuff that we did.
The last, but not least, justice is retired Justice Souter. By the way, Sandra Day O'Connor, where's my stuff here? She's 24 and a half years she served on the court, and she actually was a Stanford Law grad. So she's the only one that's outside of the Northeast, except for Northwestern. Right. Tell this Justice Souter story, because this is not an easy one.
Well, he said yes to doing an interview with us, and number one, we were surprised by that. That was a huge surprise, because he'd not done any interviews on television, as far as I know, for print either, in his 19 years on the bench. And the reason that he said he'd do this one was in honor of a friend of his named Paul Byard, who was an expert on the court's the court buildings, history, and architecture. And so Justice Souter said, you know, that was the original intent of the program, was really to take a look at the building, because again, we didn't know how many justices we'd get to talk about the process. So he came on board pretty quickly and said, yes, I'll do the interview. And but it really, with Justice Souter, it really was in honor of his friend. And while we did talk with him about oral argument, the library, and some other things, he really wanted to concentrate as a way to pay homage to his friend Paul Byard. So we talked with him for about 20 minutes on the portico, the west portico of the court.
And one of the things that he really wanted, and it made it's really, we haven't been able to do it the right way, and this is one of the things we want to explain. He wanted us to make mention every time we used anything from him that it was directly related to Paul Byard, his deceased friend who wrote about the court. And it's hard to do, so I hope we haven't done him an injustice. You were going to say something?
Oh, I don't think we've done him an injustice. I mean, this is I mean, again, he wanted to pay honor to his friend, and he learned everything about the architecture and the history of the building from his friend, and so this was a way to let folks know about that.
How long did he spend with us?
He spent about 20 minutes with us.
Here is, and this was done outside.
It was done outside.
Right outside the front door.
Right outside the front door. You can hear some birds chirping and people in the backdrop.
Okay, let's watch. And what about the whiteness? Your friend Paul Byard wrote about the whiteness of this building compared to those around here.
Yeah, he did. I remember that compared with the New Hampshire granite of the Library of Congress and of course the Capitol across the street. The whiteness I gathered from Paul was a way of on Gilbert's part to realize the intention of giving the building a prominence that its site made very difficult. One of Gilbert's ideas, as I recall, again from the Byard lecture, was to site this building down East Capitol Street to the east of here, so that the street itself would be an avenue leading up to it. Well, he couldn't do that. He had to put it where they had the room for it. And in effect, the whiteness of the marble combined, for example, with the great sweep of the staircase leading up to it, gave this sort of Roman temple form the degree of emphasis that, if left to his own designs, he probably would have achieved by having a long avenue leading up to it.
I must say, I'll never forget the expression on his face when he walked out of the court and saw the camera sitting there.
Well, he was a bit surprised. He hadn't done it in 19 years. I think anyone who hadn't sat in front of a camera would probably be a little bit surprised. Justice Souter is 70, and he's back home in New Hampshire. He was a Harvard Law School grad, and he served in the court, as you said, for 19 years. As you look back at this particular experience, what did you personally learn, and do you consider yourself an expert on the Supreme Court? Oh gosh, there's people who've covered the court for 50 years, like Lyle Denniston, Joan Biskupic. There's so many great reporters out there who've covered it too, who are experts on it. I feel like I've gotten almost a graduate degree on the quick in terms of how the place works and the history of the building. And what I came away from it is that it is a human institution. It's, the oral argument I went to, part of it. Justice Breyer actually was the one who brought it down to a level that someone who's not a lawyer could understand. So the thing for me that I got most out of it, and I hope viewers will get out of the whole week in the documentary, is understanding how the process works over there, because we do demystify it, and understanding that these are human beings. I mean, I think actually one of the neat things that Justice Souter said, it's a human institution and we don't always get it right. It wasn't in that clip we played, but it's in the documentary. And so there are 9 people up there trying the best they can, and they've all got personalities. If you could do it over again and get everything you wanted, what would you ask for? More time. I mean, these are some of those brilliant people who I've gotten the chance to be in the room with, and the time flies quickly during these interviews. I mean, as you know, you get in there and you have 30 minutes, even 45 minutes, and you figured with Justice Sotomayor, who had only been been sitting on the bench for a week since when we got a chance to sit down with her, how much could she talk about was what everyone was thinking, and the time just went by like that. So just getting more time with them to learn more about them and to sort of get inside their minds and get inside the court through that. Now, I know there are a couple of things that were fun to see, and that were the little figures on the, what would it be, the other side of the building, which would be the east side of the building. Mm-hmm. What were they, and what was your favorite? Well, the pediments on both sides of the building, and the east side of the building was interesting because it's looking toward the east, so you have sort of these figures from the past, the Eastern lawgivers. You have Moses, you've got Solon. But to me, the most interesting thing was on the west pediment, the part of the pediment that everyone sees as they go up to the court, and you see equal justice under law, and you figure, well, that must be in the Constitution. That must, where did that come from? You figured it must come from the Constitution. It came from the architectural firm who did the building. And then the other thing, when you look up there, in that pediment is Chief Justice Taft, who was the Chief Justice who was instrumental in getting that building made. He's there when he was a law student. You've got John Marshall up there. You've got the architect up there. You've got Charles Evans Hughes, who succeeded Taft, up in the pediment. So you learn lots of little things as well that, they have a connection to that place. And that's the other thing. Out of all these documentaries that we've done, the Supreme Court is interesting because it's in the moment. They're trying to interpret this document that's over 200 years old, but it's in the moment, but they look to the past for everything. And so it was a good connection for us. Now, I've asked you this before. Your wife, Paige, and your daughters, Sydney and Megan, yep, have comments about what their dad's involved in. Did they have any interest in this compared to the others? Well, kids are always going to be more interested in the White House, because that's a house and that's a cool house and the president lives there. So they were automatically interested in that. What's interesting about this one is my daughter Sydney now is 13 and is taking an honors civics course. And so they're studying the Constitution and the Supreme Court. So she's shown a little bit more interest. They know partly because of me and partly because of the classes that she's taking, they know something about the Constitution now. So, I try, it's part of what we try to do is get the word out there about how government works. But, the older they get, the more interested they get.
Thank you, Mark Farkas, producer of the Supreme Court. We look forward to watching the completed project.
Thank you, sir.